Happy politics, and welcome to another jam-packed edition of your favorite BC Politics Political podcast. There's too many P's in that sentence. This is BC Poly Hot Stove. I am your stumble-tongued host, Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Orca, and joining me live from the cover of a Johnny Cash tribute album.
Namaste. The man in black is here. I'm Jordan Bateman, Vice President Communications, the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association. And our TV has been seconded behind me for other purposes. So yes, I look especially grim Reaper today. But that's not atypical for my mood on these podcasts.
No, you're usually our ray of sunshine. Are you telling me it's going to be different this week? It's going to be... You're gonna be bad cop for once.
That's right. If I knew more Johnny Cash songs, I would work in all sorts of things. But I am hurt. Get ready for the Ring of Fire, John Horgan, etc., etc.
And we won't start by apologizing because that's what we're going to talk about first. There has been a lot of apologies in BC and Canadian politics lately. Where should we start? Should we start in Ottawa or should we start in Victoria?
Well, let's start in Ottawa. Let's get the Trudeau apology tour part 19 out of the way. The man is a part-time prime minister, full-time apologizer. And I'll let you recap. What's he apologizing for this week, Maclean?
He has apologized for not recusing himself in cabinet deliberations over whether or not to award WE charities. That's W-E, not we as in wee, monsieur. Mm-hmm. Where the Craig and Mark Kielburger venture millions of dollars for a summer program for volunteers. Problem is, Trudeau's family has some pretty tight personal connections with the Kielburgers and with WE, including his mother, his mother, his brother, and of course he himself and his wife all speak regularly there. His mother has earned something like $350,000 in the last few years from speaking events there.
Yeah,
good for her. But a pretty clear, cut and dried conflict of interest here, and he has already apologized for not removing himself from these talks.
Yes, his wife Sophie hosts a podcast for WE. Yeah. We all know how important podcasts are to franchises like ours. It's not great. You say it's not wee like the French, but certainly wee like what you find in a toilet. There is a lot of problems with this deal, and the problem now for Trudeau and the Kielburgers is that the onion is being peeled back and you're seeing all the layers underneath. The fact that WE is somehow turned into more of a real estate foundation than a actually helping people foundation. The fact that some of its missions in India and Africa actually are like resort retreats for executives to go and, third world tourism, I'm pretending to help, but really I'm on a safari. You're seeing all these links with the Morneaus and the Trudeaus, and you have Minister Chagger who says one thing and then it's discovered a few days later, oh no, she actually met with WE a week ago. WE was unregistered lobbyists sending in proposals and lobbying cabinet for big grants, and WE was apparently going to make $20 billion on this deal. Turns out more like $45 million. It could even be more than that. Maclean, rule of thumb, forget the conflict of interest stuff, the ethical stuff. Do not sole source billion-dollar contracts. Yeah. Just in general, that's bad. Then you get into all the ethical conflict of interest things. And look, Trudeau's been caught dead to rights here. This is very clearly a violation. He's going to be, the first prime minister. He was the first prime minister to be found guilty once of breaching ethics, and twice. And he's about to, set another personal best with this third. It's a bad scandal, and the only saving grace for the Liberals is that it comes on the tail end of, or in the middle of the COVID pandemic in summer. And so maybe not as many people are paying attention to it as they should, but the optics are bad. $1 billion charity with close ties to the Prime Minister's office gets a contract without any competition. Not good. And, there's a few newspaper reporters and Jesse Brown at Canadaland. It's their mission to bring down the WE charity and some of the very clunky business that they've been doing. So the story's going to continue. There's going to be more revelations every week for the next few weeks.
Yeah, the part that I have the hardest time understanding is that you see some people defending this, saying, well, it's about a charity, and what do you have against, incentivizing kids to volunteer? It's not that. It's that this is a first-term mistake. This is not something that he should be doing now. He should have learned. He has already stubbed his toe. And, once you could kind of say, obviously, this was a huge mistake. Don't do it again. But the fact that we joke about Trudeau having to apologize a lot is because he has to apologize a lot.
Yeah.
And he doesn't appear to be learning the lessons, which is the part that worries me.
Yeah, you remember the McCain campaign ad against Barack Obama and that he was really just going to be the celebrity in chief?
Yeah.
Justin Trudeau is the prime celebrity in Canada. And, so he sloughs it off. Well, I'm close to the Aga Khan and I'm close to the Kielburgers because, we run in the same circles and it's bound to happen. And I think the weakest defense of his actions is the nonsense that, we is this wonderful charity and, warm and fuzzy. Like, there were a lot of question marks around we going into this. Like, number one, they had a business entity that was apparently feeding money to the We Charity, but it turns out the We Charity was actually feeding money to this business corporation. There were all these, kind of deals and copyright attacks on things like, Kellogg's and when a reporter would call for a comment, they'd send a defamation lawyer to comment rather than an actual spokesperson. I can tell you that in Christian circles, for example, there's a lot of discussion about how negative and corrosive what you call, missionary tourism is. You drop into a country for a few weeks and, do your stuff and leave, and it's not really, helpful long term. There's a lot of questions around that sort of model in general. I didn't, having big rallies, filling an arena with 20,000 screaming kids and Ariana Grande out there singing or talking about, and the Margaret Trudeau thing is the most baffling for me, Maclean, because if her last name isn't Trudeau, she's not on that stage. Guaranteed. They're not putting out a mother and grandmother out to talk to 20,000 kids at one of these We events. This is not the way it's structured. But it's very clearly, she can have done amazing things for mental health advocacy, as apparently she has. And, obviously she's the Prime Minister. But it's only because she's the Prime Minister's mother that she's out there. That is the platform that she was given. So these are the kind of things that you just go, there's something that doesn't sit right about the We Charity.
Yeah.
And then you get into all that
flags.
celebrity, it just felt like it became more a vehicle for cool people to hang with other cool people. And we saw it right when the coronavirus was hitting. Sophie Trudeau is in England, hanging out with Idris Elba and other British celebrities at a We event, and apparently passing around the coronavirus at that point. But is a lot. This is not great. And Trudeau, when will he learn? He didn't learn after Aga Khan. He hasn't learned. I don't know. I just hate being lectured to. This is your fault. It's a little bit kind of like yesterday's briefing with Dr. Henry and Adrian Dix. Lecturing British Columbians on, wearing masks and doing the right things and social distancing, when really, the outbreak yesterday is about, a bunch of kids partying in Kelowna. I ain't a kid, Maclean. I don't need to be lectured anymore. I know what I got to do to keep my family safe. And I know there are people who do, but, the media reports were all outbreak, extreme outbreak coming, blah, blah, blah. These are 60 kids in Kelowna. It wasn't. Anyways, I'm tired of being lectured to because of other people's failings.
No, and you're absolutely right. And I don't want to spend too much time on this. I think we're running down parallel tracks. I agree with you. I think that's baffling why the Prime Minister hasn't learned this lesson. Speaking of learning lessons and apologies, this week, or I should say last week, Premier John Horgan had to apologize and retract a statement he made in his media availability on Thursday. He was being asked by, I believe, CBC's Tanya Fletcher about contrasting the response to COVID-19 with the overdose epidemic. And the Premier said, well, they're different because addiction initially starts as a choice. And then it kind of all went downhill from here, downhill from there. And you could kind of, it was all done remotely, but you could hear everyone kind of going. And as a former political staffer myself, I know that sound was praying that people would just kind of either miss it or give it a pass or it wouldn't catch fire, but it did. He had to apologize. He had to retract. And he was asked about it yesterday in question period. And again, even though he had apologized and retracted on Friday, it took him 3 questions to sort of say, no, I don't believe that. I never did. I misspoke it on in question period yesterday. That also is a bit of a misstep, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, well, it's precisely the kind of thing that the NDP have been dining out on Andrew Wilkinson for, right? Like, how long have we heard this, the dumb Wilkinson comment, crazy time of life renting, So I feel no sympathy for the Premier in this. I feel no sympathy for the NDP in having to retract it because they have made hay on this.
Yeah.
In other contexts. It's hard because, as someone who believes in self-government and personal responsibility as I do, you kind of see what the Premier is saying. But at the same time, there are lots of people, many people who get into opioid addiction for other reasons. When I had my leg injury 2.5 years ago at Maclean, almost 3 years ago now, they gave me morphine and fentanyl. And like, the pain was so unbearable they had to. But man, like Maclean, the warm feeling you get from that stuff, like, holy smokes, you can see why people, if you're predisposed to addiction, would want more. Like, because, it's drugs. Like, it's supposed to make you feel better, and short term it does, right? So, when I think about the opioid addiction, I think of that experience I had and how easy it would have been for me to go, oh, that felt good, let's keep going. Rather than, the choice, I had the ability to say no to that and not. But other people don't. Yeah. Other people live with chronic pain and it leads them down a path. It's tough. Like, so, the Premier retracted it rightly, apologized. This is such a huge issue. I'm bothered a bit by, like, before the last election, I'd like to go back and look at some of the quotes of John Horgan and other people in the NDP caucus, because I recall them laying a lot more blame at the Premier's office's door for the opioid crisis. And now we're at a rate of death that is 2 or 3 times whatever Christy Clark ever saw. We're at a point where we have more deaths in a month from opioids than we do from coronavirus up till now. Like, this is really tragic and scary. It's really shocking. And I don't feel like the plan is working. Horgan in opposition, it's kind of Christy Clark's fault. It's kind of the Liberals' fault. We're going to have this Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. Hasn't worked.
No.
The numbers say it hasn't worked. Now, COVID, it hasn't worked. It's not staying flat. Like, it's spiked. So we need to do more. But
we do need
it's so
to do
hard.
more.
It's so hard to
I
play.
think that we also, I think even the government would agree that at a certain point, symbolic gestures don't help. I mean, it was pointed out in question period this week that the dedicated ministry you mentioned of mental health and addictions, its budget is smaller than that of the Premier's office. It's true. I mean, these are the government's own numbers. Now, I'm not suggesting the Ministry of Mental Health and Addiction should have funding comparable to health or education. But yes, it's got a dedicated ministry attached to it, but it's not a very big one, and it's difficult. And obviously, as you say, the numbers indicate that it simply isn't working. Now, I would argue that the NDP were wrong to assign blame to the previous government before, and it would be wrong to assign blame to any government now. But whatever governments are doing, it's not working. And claiming that they've done a lot is just, well, obviously the numbers are making liars of us all. Yeah,
I kind of wonder why the Liberals don't come out with some of those old quotes. Like, where's the fact sheet? Derek Cummings, if you're watching this, where's the fact sheet on, things that they said when they were in opposition about the opioids and how they blamed the government of the day? And just, hoist them on their own petard, right? Like, this is what you said then. Well, you've been in charge 3 years now, and it's only gotten worse. So what's the plan? We need to do more. Like, it's just... Yeah, we do. Like, we've made such great progress. And I don't give government any credit of any stripe for this. It really is. It's been business leaders and it's been the public at large saying, breaking down the barriers around mental health. It's been people like Corey Hirsch with the Canucks and Rick Rippon on the sports side passing, taking his own life. And what did that all mean? And, so like a lot of progress has been made. Bell's Let's Talk Day. Like we talk about these issues now in a way that we never did before. It's companies like mine offering better mental health services and making sure that people have access to when they need help in a crisis. But we've broken down that barrier, but for some reason it has not transitioned over to the opioid crisis and seeing a reduction in that. And it's tragic. Like these are not always I think in some people's minds it's homeless people, and
Yeah.
no, these are like coaches and brothers and mothers, and like these are, every single one of these people are real people with a mom and a dad and family who love them and friends who support them, and this has happened. We've got to find a way to bust through this, and whatever we're doing now isn't working, so it's time to reset and give it some more thought.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And you mentioned it's a complex problem. I think probably in the moment when the premier is being asked the question, he was picturing, a recidivist heroin addict.
Yeah.
When, yes, that person exists in numbers greater than they should. But we're also talking about people like you described, people who are prescribed opioids and were never able to kick it because they are intensely addictive.
Yeah. You're talking about people who often in incredible pain. And it lingers, and the rest of us don't understand that, right? Like, that is the problem. So we've got to find, we just have to find a way through this. Like, whatever you're doing now, government's not working. So it's time for a reset and a rethink, and let's go from there. But that aside, we're a politics show, and talking about the politics of it, the BC Liberals absolutely should be pouncing on the NDP for these issues, demanding, what is the plan? Is the premier's attitude that this is all, some sort of choice? Is that actually, kind of seeping into how they respond to it? Is it getting the kind of scrutiny it deserves and the kind of funding it needs? Those are all very valid questions.
Speaking of things getting unwanted attention, we should talk about the controversy that sort of, it kind of came back. This was an issue that was talked about a couple weeks ago. Advertising in a magazine. Yes. Is it Light Magazine?
I believe it's Light Magazine, and it's run by the people who used to run Christian Info News, for you old Christians out there who remember the little stack of newspapers you used to ignore at church on Sunday mornings.
The issue was the BC Liberals were advertising, the caucus was advertising in it, which is fairly standard. And those ads were appearing alongside some pretty unsavory content. Andrew Wilkinson was alerted through the media, said this is unacceptable, we're going to stop, and we're going to review our caucus advertising, and really that should have been the end of it, but unfortunately, it wasn't the end of it. That issue came back to haunt the BC Liberals again when, is it Chilliwack Kent? MLA Laurie Thronis said,
yeah, I believe so.
I'm going to keep advertising in this magazine.
Yeah, Game of Thronis. Here we go. So I am of several minds on this. As we discussed previously, I do not believe that advertising in a publication means you endorse everything within that publication. I just don't. ICBA takes out ads in the Vancouver Sun. I do not believe that I'm endorsing, every Daphne Branham column. I just don't. That is not how I'm. If someone advertises on this podcast, I do not believe that they are 100% endorsing all of my opinions.
Yeah.
Heck, sometimes I don't endorse my own opinions after giving another thought. Like, I just do not expect that to.
Nor do advertisers know what content their ads will appear next to.
Totally. So taking out an ad in a Christian paper that, wishing people Happy Easter seems perfectly reasonable to me. Like, I'm sorry, I just don't see it. And the fact that, we had NDP MLAs taking out an ad for I believe Ramadan in a Muslim publication that had some questionable comments in it. Same thing. Like, I'm not bothered by it. I'm not thinking to myself, boy, they must endorse every single word of this thing. I just don't think that way. So I find that very unsophisticated. I find the media a little duplicitous in this because I think they know that every advertiser on their channel or on their on their network doesn't necessarily support everything that's in there, but there's this purity of thing. We're in a weird time. So there's that piece. The second piece is Laurie Thronis was elected to represent the people of Chilliwack, Kent, we believe, Chilliwack, and he was reelected. And he is a social conservative, unapologetically, in a riding that generally leans social conservative. And while I am not a social conservative, there are many, many British Columbians who are. And guess what? They deserve representation too. And they chose this guy. And if he decides that this is a way to reach out to that constituency group, then yeah. And it is a sign of how this kind of party has to, the BC Liberal Party has to be a big tent. And, of course the NDP are seizing on this. But don't for one second think it's solely because of LGBTQ issues. They're really seizing on this because it's a chance to drive a political wedge between the BC Liberals and the BC Conservatives. And right now, John Horgan would not be Premier today if the BC Conservatives hadn't run candidates in Courtney Comox and in Maple Ridge against Mark Dalton. They would, if they hadn't run those candidates, the BC Liberals would have had more than enough votes to win those 2 seats, and we're in the fifth term of the BC Liberal government. So it behooves the NDP to find anything they can to push those social conservatives out of the BC Liberal tent because they are so desperate to cling to power. I find that kind of politics very divisive, very corrosive, and it makes me a bit angry. Mark Dalton was defeated in Maple Ridge because he was not socially conservative enough. This is one of the most socially conservative MLAs BC has seen in the last 25 years. He was not socially conservative enough, so the BC Conservatives ran a candidate against him and defeated him, thus paving the way for an NDP victory. Andrew Wilkinson needs to keep this in mind. Like, I know Andrew Wilkinson's not a social conservative. Like, I get it. He's a pretty centrist liberal guy, right? Federal liberal. Okay, that happened. Like, no one's perfect. All right, but he's like, if he pushes that side of the party out, they will run BC Conservative candidates, and they will pick off a couple of folks not getting elected, but just enough votes to make sure an NDPer wins that seat. So I find the NDP, they're not coming from a pure virtuous place on this. They're coming from a very calculated political place on this. Like, the more they can divide those groups within the BC Liberal tent, the better it is for them. That said, I support these rights. Like, these folks have, they've been through hell. I watched a documentary last week on the Stonewallian and what happened in the late 60s in New York City. And just, some of the media that was out in the 60s by, like, Mike Wallace and 60 Minutes, and the way homosexuality was treated is just so appalling and crushing. And I've said before, a lot of Christians like me have come a long way in our view on this. And what really bothers me about this is that we're not allowing space for other social conservatives and Christians to come to the same realization that many of us have. And there's a conflict going on within some of the more conservative churches about this, where, traditionally Christians have been opposed to this, but you actually start to talk to us one-on-one, and you find that the hand is a lot more open to this idea. And for my wife and I, 10 years ago now, or maybe more, we came to this, belief that, love is love, and where love is, God is. And so, who am I to say that this is wrong? I'm not. And it's okay. It's okay. It doesn't diminish your faith in God. If anything, it's enhanced my faith in God, because I see this kind of different view of him now. It's not about rules and what's set out in a document 2,000 years ago. It's about, an ever-evolving relationship and faith. So all that to say, I'm very muddled on this. I don't have a clear thing, but I do definitely see the political reasons why the NDP are pushing it. But I also think the Liberals got to be a little careful about just shaving off major portions of their coalition.
Well, and that's probably why their response since has been very guarded. Yep. There has been a very persistent push for them to respond. And we're only talking about a couple days now, but still, in a 24/7 news cycle, a couple days is a long time.
Yeah.
So we'll see where this goes. I suspect we'll be talking about this next week.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure.
It will depend how they handle it and what the response is.
And it depends I think it depends what Laurie does next.
Yes.
If he draws a line in the sand and forces some sort of decides to sit as an independent or something, that would be very problematic. But my sense is that Laurie's a reasonable guy. We also need to remember Laurie Thronis and John Martin, but Laurie Thronis were BC Conservative candidates at one point who ran in elections and against the BC Liberals and lost, and then ended up joining the party as a way to kind of bring it back together under Christy Clark. So, there is that kind of historic feeling, and my sense is that, if he did it once...
Did Laurie run as a BC Conservative?
Yeah.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, he did. He did. So
he was the BC Liberal candidate that ran against John Martin and whoever the NDP person who won, Gwen O'Mahony.
Right. Yeah, Gwen O'Mahony. Yes. The one-time NDP MLA for... It's crazy. She was no Joe Trasolini. I'm just saying.
No.
I'm pretty sure Laurie Rand was a BC Conservative at some point. But anyways, it doesn't matter.
Fair enough.
They've seen firsthand what happened in Chilliwack when he split that vote. And all you got to do is look across the river at Mark Dalton's, the demise of his political career to know what will happen if that coalition breaks apart.
Well, quite so. And if you don't think Mark Dalton is socially conservative enough, you have not met Mark Dalton.
Yes. Remember when he was named Minister of State for Independent Schools, and you would have thought that the way the Teachers Federation went after him, you would have thought he was controlling these massive budgets and wielding this mighty stick. But you're looking at going, hey, relax. It's Minister of State for Independent School. It's not a big deal. Come on, come on.
He's not exactly the second man down the rung from the premier. It's
exactly.
A few steps in between. Last thing we should talk about this week, and it's something that you are uniquely qualified to talk about, the ongoing court challenge against the so-called community benefit agreements by which the NDP has mandated that on certain public infrastructure projects, if you want to work on it, you have to join, how many unions is it that they've chosen?
19.
Is it 5?
19 building trades unions. 19
building trades unions, only one of them, which represents a fraction of the total construction workforce in BC. Was it being heard by the Court of Appeal, and give us an update on where things stand.
Yeah, so basically ICBA and a number of other construction associations, and 2 unions, by the way, some companies and some individual workers were in court challenging whether Minister Trevena had the legal right to make this decision. You are stripping away freedom of association, freedom of how you organize your workforce. A lower court found that, yes, she did. We are appealing that. The appeal has been heard, and now we await a decision from the BC Court of Appeal on it. It was the 16th and 17th we were in court on that, via Zoom, by the way, in order to deal with that. But here's the bottom line for the average British Columbia taxpayer. When you force 85% of the construction workers in BC out of a project because they are not unionized in the form that the NDP want, that raises costs. There's costs to do with bureaucracy. If a company does get a contract, they have to lay off their workers, have them apply and be hired by a ICBC-like Crown Corporation, who then employs them and then gets them their certification with the unions, and then there's all this bureaucracy and sends them out with strangers to work on sites. It drives up costs, and on these, even without the Broadway subway yet, which the final budget isn't in, but on Patello and the Highway 1 projects, we're already seeing cost overruns of about $400 million because of this. Well, Maclean, $400 million would come in real handy right now on other capital projects. $400 million would come in really handy fighting COVID. $400 million would come in really handy to the tourism industry. $400 million would come in very handy in fighting the opioid crisis. We could use 400 schmil. Instead, it's a political payoff by John Horgan to these 19 building trades unions, who just happened to give him $2.5 million in campaign donations over the past few cycles, and who just happened to provide many of his favorite, I was going to call them flunkies, but we will call them fart catchers, and ministers. Lots of them come from that kind of union background. So, it's a political payoff. It's a favor. It's a sweetheart deal. It should be stopped. This is one avenue we're taking to try and stop it. But the better way would be for taxpayers to understand just how much this is costing them, and that you're not getting better value for this money. You're not getting more construction. You're not even getting more quote-unquote community benefits. You're lining union pockets in order to do it.
Oh, and only certain unions.
Yes, and only certain unions. Exactly, only 19 unions. In fact, some unions who have been supportive of the NDP are cut out of this deal, and they're just as ticked off. And who can blame them? Workers should have a right to organize themselves however they see fit. Whether it's an employee association, whether it's a building trades union, whether it's CLAC, whether, whatever it is, progressive union, whether it's pure open shop. They should have the right to organize themselves and decide how that is, not to have a ham-fisted government come down and say, no, we want you part of these, 19 unions that give us money. It's not right.
You talk to some people in the NDP about this off the record casually, and you say, well, okay, you've made the decision that the workers have to be unionized, but you're saying that these unions don't count. Why? And it's the answer you get when they're being honest is always the same, and it's always the same thing. It's they're not real unions.
Yes.
What?
Yes.
What makes them not a real union, and how is it healthy to have the government decide? Isn't that the point of unionization, is to reverse the balance of power there? But for the government to decide, well, no, you're not a real union for reasons. Wow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can talk a little bit about the NDP union ideology here, right? So they would call CLAC and Canada West Construction Union and Sissy Woo's another one. They would call them rat unions, because they're not real unions. But they are. These folks take a vote. They decide to unionize this way. They negotiate in good faith with the employer. Are they, grinding the employer down to the letter of every? No, they're not like the building trades unions in that way. But the model for the building trades unions hasn't been working. Until they got this sweetheart monopoly, they went from 90% of the workforce in construction workforce in British Columbia in 1985. 90% of the construction workforce was building trades unions. Today, 15% is. So if over 30 years you've gone from 90% to 15%, guess what? Your model isn't working. Like, I don't have to be a genius to know that you're probably not doing the right kind of business and you're not reflecting workers' rights properly. So some of those workers have gone on to go to CLAC and other places. Site C is being built by CLAC. This is a big, this was a big angry issue for those building trades unions when the NDP decided to continue on with Site C because they were giving money, giving jobs to CLAC workers. We can also talk about this other thing called salting, which you and I received a poster in Westminster.
In an email, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, essentially, so Maclean and I get an eagle-eyed listener tipped us off to a poster that was up in New Westminster, and essentially it's like a salt shaker and, have you ever thought of salting and, join a union, blah, blah, blah. And essentially this is a technique they use where they try to get a hardcore union person hired by a non-building trades company with the sole goal of going in there and unionizing that company. And this is
I had never heard of this before.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, I was like, yeah, this is a thing. And so, I asked, where are these posters being seen? Who's building around there? And we'll go talk to those employers, make sure they're aware of, be careful who you're hiring because who knows who's coming in to salt it. But this is why the NDP so desperately want to get rid of the secret ballot and union certification votes, so that salter can go in and get them to sign cards, and then when they hit 50%, they're automatically unionized, rather than what happens today when you hit 50% of cards being signed, you trigger a secret ballot vote where both sides get to make their presentation to the membership at large and the workers decide. It's a very underhanded way of doing things. It's very typical for them. But again, we take comfort in the fact that they've gone from 90% down to 15%. And if it wasn't for these sweetheart deals, they'd be even lower than that.
Why do they call it salting? I mean, when I hear that, I was coming into this new.
Yeah.
I think of, Roman soldiers salting the fields of Carthage to destroy it.
Precisely.
It's an inherently negative thing. Why would they call it that? I'm baffled.
Because they are salting against the evil open shop.
Man. Okay. So this is a destructive thing.
Yeah, and it's happened.
I'm new to this.
Yeah, there was a company named Trotter and Morton. They're still around, an electrical company, I believe. They had someone come in and salt them, and those folks decided to join the building trades unions, and now that company's gone from 100 employees down to 10. Like, it's expensive to do business with the unions, and this is the problem. Their model is broken. I am watching, like Jason Kenney in Alberta has brought forward this very interesting amendment to their election financing rules where unions now have to get permission from their members to spend money on political initiatives. So every union member will get a little note in the mail or email, and they'll have to click a box to say, yes, please use my union dues and spend it on political means. And it's a way of, I think it's another way of trying to show the unions, like, you're not actually representing who you think you're representing, right? Like, many of these members don't want their money spent on this. And it stems in Alberta because, the Alberta Federation of Labor, who's run by one of this guy, a guy who recently compared this bill to Nazi Germany in 3 straight tweets, and then proudly doubled down on it before finally someone got a hold of him and said, like, 3 days later he retracts and apologizes. But it flows from this, the Alberta Federation of Labor being opposed to oil and gas construction, which pays all the bills in Alberta. Like, it's crazy. So, of course the Kenney government's saying, like, you can't spend money fighting oil and gas without your members' permission. So there's some interesting things happening. If the Alberta Federation of Labor isn't careful and keeps pushing these crazy ideas and fights, I could see Alberta becoming the first right to work province, following along with what some of the states have done. So they better be careful over there. Anyways, all that to say, unionism, very complicated relationship in the labor world, and a deep, long-lasting love affair with the BC NDP.
The man in black, indeed.
That's right.
And we learned this last week. You cannot hear this over my Mickey Mouse headset. Thank you, _ but the bells have rung, and the House is about to start sitting. So we should probably wrap this up. You can catch us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, anywhere you can find podcasts. You can also find us at the mothership at theorca.ca. I am at Maclean K. He is at Jordan Bateman. There are no underscores on this podcast. Until next time, happy politics.